The sirens were still echoing when she stepped out of the shadows, her eyes cutting into me like sharp blades. The floor was stained with blood, the body still warm of the man who, minutes earlier, had aimed his gun at me. I was breathing heavy, my weapon still gripped tight in my hand, trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing. But then she moved closer, trembling, her face marked by tears and fury. She stopped so close I could feel the heat of her breath, and that's when she spat out the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "You killed the man I loved." My heart froze. The adrenaline that kept me standing turned into a suffocating weight. The shouts from my team over the radio faded into the background as those words pierced through my armor. For the first time in years, I didn't know if I had just saved a life or destroyed two. My name is Aaron Blake, detective of the 8th District. 14 years on the streets carved into my skin like tattoos, made of gunpowder and insomnia. I grew up in a small town in Missouri where the factory whistle marked the hours, and my father, a Vietnam veteran with distant eyes, taught me that justice is not revenge and that the law is a blind blade. The one who holds it decides where to cut. I carried that lesson with me when I joined the force, believing I could use that blade carefully. But I learned early that caution isn't always what the night demands when someone screams for help on the other side of a thin wall. In my left pocket, I carry a silver dollar, a gift from my brother the day I received my badge. He died a year later, an overdose in an abandoned gas station. I, who prided myself on seeing danger a block away, didn't see the ruin in my own house. Since then, I've held on to a ritual: never reduce a person to a number. In my reports, I write full names, note tattoos, birthdays found on IDs, keep details that humanize. It's my way of not letting the city turn people into statistics. My marriage didn't survive the overnight shifts or the different versions of myself I brought home. My ex-wife used to say I slept with my hand clenched, as if I were still holding the gun. I pretended it was just a nervous tick. We both lied. I tried therapy, learned that talking doesn't erase anything, but it organizes the chaos enough so I can drive to the next call. Sometimes I pray, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. Because in the end, clarity saves more lives than courage. My city is a mosaic of scars, alleys with nicknames, burned-out lampposts, windows that open just a crack when the squad car turns the corner. I know every neighborhood by the holes in the pavement. Wallace, my FTO in the first year, taught me the lesson no manual admits. There's no such thing as a clean shot, Blake. There's the necessary shot and the question you carry after. Since then, I've trained hesitation. Half a second before acting, I study shoulders, feet, eyes. I know a misplaced word can ignite powder, and silence can disarm faster than a bullet. I carry a scar on my collarbone, a reminder of an armed robbery that turned into a survival class. The kid was 17, with a crooked crown tattooed on his wrist. When his gun jammed on the second pull, the shock on his face that I was still alive never left me. I asked his name while cuffing him. "Trey," he said, like revealing a secret. Months later, I sent him a letter in juvie, not to absolve him, but to remind myself that no one is born a criminal. Every crime has a story before it, and it's in that gray zone that I walk every day. I believe in the law, but I know the law doesn't embrace anyone. The justice I seek isn't in speeches, but in narrow hallways of walk-ups, greasy bar tables, backyards where mothers count coins to pay the light bill. To reach it, sometimes I bargain with informants, turn down polished media praise, and keep boundaries I never cross. Never plant evidence, never lie in testimony, never pull the trigger out of rage. These are oaths I make to myself in the mirror, even knowing the streets love to test promises. That night, before she stepped out of the shadows, I was already walking on that blade's edge. The man on the floor had aimed his weapon, and my body reacted before my mind. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air when her words cut through my skin. "You killed the man I loved." The manual says to secure the scene, call internal affairs, protect the witness. But there's no handbook for the weight that drops on your chest when someone looks you in the eye and, without screaming, calls you a murderer. That was the moment I realized certain lines aren't painted on the ground. They're written in the eyes of the survivors. And that night, my line began to disappear. It was early evening when the radio crackled inside the cruiser, that metallic voice carrying the kind of message you never get used to. Shots fired in progress. Armed suspect on the move. Nearest unit, respond. The words snapped like a verdict. I was only a few blocks away, the streets still slick from a fresh rain, and I felt my stomach tighten before I even confirmed. I pressed the button, my voice calm though my pulse was racing. 8th District, Detective Blake en route. Every call is a lottery where you never pick the prize. Sometimes it's a false alarm, sometimes it's blood on the floor. But something in the cadence of the dispatcher's voice told me this was real. There was a tremor in her tone, and when the radio lets emotion bleed through, it's because someone on the other side has already seen too much. The address came through, an old stretch of houses in a neighborhood where shadows are longer than the streetlights. I hit the siren only once, short, just enough to warn the city that I was coming. The streets shifted in response. Curtains drawn shut, dogs barking, cars slowing down. It's strange how a squad car bends the rhythm of life, how the world seems to pause for a second to watch someone else running toward danger. At every corner, I rehearsed protocol in my mind. Secure cover, assess risk, protect civilians. But alongside the training, another voice followed. My brother's face on that last night, and the silent promise I made never to ignore what hides behind statistics. As I drove, the radio broke again. Suspect described as male, Caucasian, mid-30s, armed with a semi-automatic pistol. Reports indicate a woman inside the residence. The word, woman sent a chill slicing through my spine. Hostage situation. The kind of call where there's no margin for error, where a single wrong move can take 2 lives in seconds. My grip on the wheel tightened until my knuckles went white. I reached the block in under 4 minutes, though every second stretched long, measured by the pounding of my heartbeat. I killed the siren and left only the blue lights flashing, painting fractured shadows across the peeling facades. It was a street that knew, forced silence. No one outside, no windows open. Fear had already made its rounds before the police arrived. As I stepped out, the first thing I noticed was the faint scent of gunpowder still hanging in the damp air, invisible proof that someone had already pulled the trigger. My boots splashed in shallow puddles, each step amplified by the absence of any other sound. I touched the holster, checking my weapon again, a useless ritual, as if the gesture itself could shield me from what waited inside. The dispatcher asked for a position update, but I hesitated before answering. I knew that from this point on, every word recorded could be used as my defense or as my indictment. Finally, I said, "Detective Blake on the perimeter, assessing entry." Then I let go of the button, trusting instinct over protocol. The target house was small, a wooden porch sagging with age, paint peeling off the siding. A single yellow bulb buzzed above the door, throwing shadows that twitched and crawled across the walls. No voices, no footsteps, just a silence so thick it pressed against my chest. I leaned closer, listening. That's when I heard it. A muffled sob from inside, followed by a man's voice dripping with rage, spitting threats. There was no turning back. This wasn't just another call. It was a crossroads, the kind that divides past from future on opposite sides of the street. I didn't know it yet, but that night, it wouldn't just be the law on trial. It would be me. When I stepped onto the damp grass in front of the house, it felt like crossing an invisible line. The world outside, the distant hum of traffic, the drip of rain sliding into storm drains, the static of the radio, faded away, cut off like a TV switched to black. What remained was the weight of my own breathing, the creak of wood under my boots, and the almost physical sensation that somewhere inside, someone's life was hanging by a thread. From the outside, the house was nothing special, faded white paint, peeling off the siding, a narrow porch with a forgotten rocking chair, curtains drawn too tight for a casual evening. But to me, every detail was a clue. The gate left ajar suggested haste, abandonment, maybe a struggle. The locked windows spoke of a barricade, desperation. A bucket of children's toys sat tipped near the stairs, cars and dolls scattered across the wet grass, traces of an ordinary life violently interrupted. The street lamp flickered, casting the strobe of my cruiser's blue. Lights across the facade, making the whole scene feel less real, more like a nightmare staged for me to walk into. The silence was so dense, I swore I could hear my own blood pounding inside my temples. And then it came, a muffled sob, quick and sharp, from just beyond the front door. A woman, no doubt. My instinct screamed to hold, wait for backup, but my mind was counting seconds like coins falling into a jar, each one the difference between life saved or life lost. I pressed my radio, voice, low. Front perimeter, suspect inside, hostage confirmed. The response lagged, then came, flat and procedural. Units en route. Stand by for instructions. Stand by. That phrase weighs like lead when you know someone inside might not have minutes left to stand by. I stepped onto the porch, gun drawn, hand steady, though my chest burned with adrenaline. The front door bore fresh marks, a boot kick, maybe forced entry. I pressed my ear to the wood. What I heard froze me. A man's voice, harsh, laced with fury, spitting threats. Between them, the unmistakable sound of a weapon being handled. I shut my eyes for a moment. My brother's face flashed, like it always does when fear starts pulling me under. The overdose, the night I couldn't save him, and that memory hardened into resolve. I wouldn't watch another life slip away while I stood outside. Shadows moved behind the curtains, nervous pacing back and forth. It was like staring into a dark aquarium, knowing a predator circled inside, but never seeing it clearly. And deep down, I felt something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a crime scene. There was something personal in the air, a tension beyond violence, like every word spoken inside carried the weight of confession. I took a long breath, adjusted my vest, and wrapped my hand around the doorknob. The metal was cold, biting. The decision wasn't whether to enter or not. The decision was whether I was prepared for what I'd find once I did, because the streets had already taught me. The worst wounds don't always come from bullets. Sometimes it's the words that tear straight through the soul. And as I stood there, ears straining to catch the rhythm of her sobs and his restless pacing, I knew this wasn't just another call. I wasn't about to step into a scene where the law would be written in reports. I was about to step into a place where the law would be written in the eyes of a hostage, the rage of an armed man, and in my own ability to tell right from wrong. And once I crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. I pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the wood sounding too loud, as if announcing my presence with every inch. The smell hit me immediately. Sweat, alcohol, and gunpowder mixed into a suffocating haze. The living room was dimly lit, just a weak bulb overhead, and in that half-light every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential shot waiting to happen. My gun was raised, my finger steady, my eyes scanning for the smallest movement. On the floor near the sofa, I saw the signs of a struggle. A table flipped on its side, broken bottles, fresh drops of blood glistening against the wood. The muffled crying came from deeper inside, down a hallway, tangled with angry, guttural words spat like venom. He was there, and she was too, and me, caught in between, forcing myself to breathe evenly so I wouldn't shake when it mattered most. Each step forward was measured, deliberate, but inside me the noise was deafening. Then the radio on my shoulder burst alive with a status update, metallic and sharp in the silence. "Police! I know you're in there!" His voice thundered back from the darkness, full of rage, raw and frantic. And then I heard it, the unmistakable click of a gun's hammer being pulled back. No shot yet, but the threat was absolute. One wrong move and she would die. I edged closer to the hallway, every muscle primed, the blue strobe of my cruiser flashing through the windows and painting the walls, like some surreal warning. And then I saw them. He had her by the shoulders, the barrel of a pistol pressed hard against her temple. His eyes were wild, the gaze of a man who'd crossed every line and knew there was no road back. "Drop the weapon!" I shouted, my voice steady, louder than I felt inside. He laughed, dry and joyless. "You don't get it, cop. I've got nothing left to lose." The words echoed down the hall like a sentence already sealed. Her eyes met mine then, pleading, drowning, desperate. And in that instant, the entire world shrank into a single choice. Push forward or hold back, gamble on words or on a bullet. I took one step closer, keeping my gun trained on his chest, and the tension snapped tighter. He pressed the weapon harder against her, and she let out a muffled cry. For a heartbeat, stretched like eternity, I believed he would pull the trigger. My pulse thudded in rhythm with her breath, short, frantic, as every instinct screamed for me to act. Then, from behind, "Me!" The back door splintered with a crash. Backup units stormed in, their presence breaking the standoff for the briefest moment. He turned just slightly, his attention split, and in that tiny, merciless window, I saw it. The opening that separates living from dying. I lunged forward, 2 steps, my gun locked on him, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Let her go now!" The bulb above flickered, and for a moment her tear-streaked face was lit as if by fate itself. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. And there, in that narrow hallway soaked with shadows, with his finger on the trigger and mine fixed on the sight, the entire universe narrowed to a single breath. That was the moment I knew. The next choice I made would never let me go. Manuals didn't matter. Laws didn't matter. The line between justice and survival, right and wrong, it all collapsed into one impossible second. The gunshot exploded before I even registered pulling the trigger. The sound tore down the hallway, rattling the walls as if the whole house screamed with it. The woman dropped to the floor, unharmed, while the man staggered back, his hand clutching his chest, eyes wide in shock more than in pain. His weapon slipped from his fingers, hitting the wood with a hollow final thud. I rushed to her, pulling her close, shielding her body with mine as silence swallowed the chaos. The radio crackled, voices shouted commands, but all I could hear was her breath against me, and his groan, faint and broken, as he bled a few feet away. Training dictated I keep my gun drawn, secure the scene, control every angle, but my eyes locked on his face. The blood spread fast across his shirt, blooming red, and for a moment I didn't see a criminal. I saw a young man dying too soon on the cold floor of a forgotten house. His lips moved, struggling to form words, but nothing came. His eyes searched, desperate, not for me, but for her. And that's when I realized there was something between them, something more than violence. She tore free from my grasp, crawling to his side despite my attempts to stop her. She clutched his bloody hand, pressed it to her face, and sobbed with a grief so raw it cut through me like a blade. Then she lifted her gaze, her voice trembling with rage and despair, and delivered the words that would haunt me forever. "You killed the man I loved." It hit harder than the recoil. The world froze. No sirens, no commands, no justifications could blunt the truth in her eyes. The hostage wasn't just a victim, and he wasn't just an armed suspect. They were 2 souls bound together, 2 stories colliding in a way I had never imagined. My mind flashed through memories like lightning. My father telling me the law's a blind blade. My brother's overdose in a gas station bathroom. The oath I'd made never to reduce people to numbers. And here I was, the detective who swore to protect life, responsible for shattering hers. Medics swarmed in, working desperately to stop the bleeding, but she never let go of him. She whispered things I couldn't hear, too intimate for strangers. I stepped back, my gun still dangling in my hand, but with no strength left to holster it. 1,000 truths crushed me all at once. The suspect we label as a threat is, to someone, the center of their world. The sergeant clapped a hand on my shoulder, voice brisk and approving. "Good shot, Blake. You saved the hostage." But his words were hollow. On paper, it would read as a successful intervention, a justified shooting, a life protected. But in her memory, and in mine, it would always be the night a man died, and the love of her life died with him. And in that moment, I understood something no academy manual will ever say. It isn't the bullet that defines a cop's destiny. It's the eyes of those who survive. And in her eyes, burning with grief and hate, I wasn't a savior. I was the man who destroyed her world. I walked back to the cruiser carrying an invisible sentence on my shoulders. The radio was still alive with overlapping voices, status reports, orders, but to me it was just static, meaningless noise. The only thing echoing in my head were her eyes, burning with grief and rage, and the words that pierced deeper than any bullet. You killed the man I loved. It didn't matter how many protocols I had followed, how many training manuals could back my decision. Nothing erased the truth that lived in her gaze. Inside me, a war broke out. On one side was the cop, trained and disciplined, who knew I had saved a hostage by taking the only shot available. On the other was the man who had already lost a brother, who still carried the guilt of failing to save him, who understood too well the unbearable weight of losing someone you love. And that man whispered in my ear, "Did you really have to pull the trigger? Was there another way? Another word? Another move that could have changed everything?" I rubbed the scar on my collarbone, the one from a night years ago, when I was a second away from dying. I always told myself it was a reminder. Life is fragile. Every decision could be the last. But now it mocked me, as if to say I had learned nothing, because survival isn't the same as living with yourself. Internal affairs would come with their questions, and I had every legal answer ready. Defense of a third party, imminent threat, justified use of force. The prosecutor would clear me, the paperwork would absolve me, but none of that mattered to the question burning in my chest. Who is Aaron Blake without the badge? A man who believes in justice, or someone who just survives at the cost of others? I thought of my father and how he never spoke of the war. He would sit for hours, staring out the window, and when I pressed him, he'd say only, "Some battles you win, but you never come back whole." That night, I finally understood. I had saved a life, yes, but left a piece of myself bleeding on that living room floor. And another truth gnawed at me. For years, I promised myself I'd never shoot out of anger, never let rage guide my finger. But when I saw that gun pressed against her head, I felt a fury that wasn't just professional, it was personal. A fire that said I couldn't lose someone else, not like my brother. So when I pulled the trigger, was it pure training? Or was it desperation, fear, even vengeance? The questions tore at me. I sat behind the wheel but couldn't start the engine. My hands were steady, too steady for someone who'd just walked through hell, and that scared me. Training had turned me into a machine for split-second decisions, but I wondered what was left of the man I used to be. Did I still know the difference between coldness and courage? Outside, the flashing lights of squad cars painted the street like a movie set. From the outside, I was just another cop who'd done his job. Threat neutralized, hostage saved. But inside, I was fractured, caught between the oath to protect and the reality that I had torn someone's world apart. And it was there, sitting in the silence with my weapon still smelling of gunpowder, that I realized the harshest truth of wearing the badge. The law may absolve you, but your conscience never forgets. With every heartbeat, her words echoed louder, like a verdict etched into my soul. You killed the man I loved. It was just past midnight when they called me in for the first preliminary statement. Internal affairs was already moving, the machine of protocol grinding into motion, reports, testimonies, justifications. I knew exactly what I was supposed to say, that I entered the residence, assessed the imminent threat, saw a gun pressed against the hostage's head, and fired. A clean statement, straightforward, unshakable. Just repeat those words, and everything would line up neatly. But as I sat down in front of the recorder, I realized the real question wasn't what I was supposed to say. It was what I could live with afterward. Her image wouldn't leave me. On her, knees beside his bleeding body, eyes burning with accusation, whispering words that shredded me. You killed the man I loved. That wasn't anger at the law, at the system, or at the badge. It was aimed at me. I had saved her life, yet in the same instant destroyed the one thing that mattered most to her. That contradiction pulsed inside me like a second wound, deeper than the bullet hole on his chest. That was when I realized my real trial wouldn't be in a courtroom or in a boardroom at internal affairs. It would be in the mirror. I had to decide who I was going to be from that moment on. The cop who hides behind sterile reports, or the man who dares to admit that sometimes the law doesn't wash the blood off your hands. The investigator across from me gestured to begin. The room smelled of burnt coffee and damp paper. His pen tapped on the desk, marking the rhythm of my hesitation. I drew a long breath and started speaking. Each word weighed heavier than a bullet. As I gave my account, the doubt tugged at me. Should I give them the sanitized version that would keep me safe? Or should I expose the hesitation, the anger, the truth no one wanted to hear? For a moment, I shut my eyes and saw my father again, telling me that the law is a blind blade and that the one who wields it decides the cut. I held that blade now. If I chose the cold, clean version, I'd be cleared and move forward. But if I admitted the hesitation, the fury, the human side that broke through the training, I might end up destroying myself in the very system I swore to serve. In the end, the words slipped out before I could stop them. I said I hesitated. I said I considered holding my fire. I admitted that when I saw the gun pressed to her temple, I felt rage, personal, consuming. Words no manual teaches you, but they left my mouth like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. The investigator's pen froze mid-scribble, his eyes lifting in surprise, but he said nothing. I knew what this could cost me, but at least it meant I could still look in the mirror without flinching. I left that room carrying a different kind of weight, not just the burden of the shot I fired, but the choice to speak the truth when it would have been easier to hide behind the badge. That was the real moment of decision, and in that moment, I finally understood. Every cop faces a line they can never step back from. Mine wasn't just pulling the trigger, it was admitting that I did it as a man, not just as a machine. The news of the shooting spread faster than the smoke that still lingered in the air. By the time I walked out of the interview room, the hallway was already lined with eyes. Some looked at me with respect, others with judgment, and some simply avoided my gaze. In the world of cops, no one says it out loud, but everyone knows when one of us has crossed an invisible line. And I had crossed mine. The sergeant greeted me with a firm handshake, the kind that feels more like an order, disguised as reassurance. "You did what had to be done," he said, almost like a ritual. Other colleagues echoed the same. "You saved the hostage. It was a clean shot. Could have ended much worse." Words that sounded right, but rang hollow inside me, because none of them came from her lips, from the woman whose eyes had already branded me a killer. Internal affairs documented every detail. Paramedics finalized their medical reports, and the press circled the neighborhood like vultures, hungry for images of the blood still drying on the floor. I knew that within hours my name could be in the headlines, hero to some, murderer to others. But the only headline that mattered was the one etched into her memory, and it was a verdict I could never erase. Back at the precinct, routine carried on as if nothing had happened. The coffee was still bitter, the phones kept ringing, new cases piled in. But for me, the world moved in slow motion. Every voice sounded far away, every laugh echoed like mockery. I was there, physically present, but no longer part of it. It felt like I had stepped across a hidden threshold, the side of those who still believe in the mission, and the side of those who know the real cost of carrying it out. A meeting with the brass followed. "You acted within the law," they said. "Case will be closed as defense of a third party. Take a few days off, Blake, then get back out there." Days off. As if rest could erase her words. "You killed the man I loved." Their language was technical, detached, but my mind stayed locked on her face, on her grief. Every signature, every line of official absolution felt like pushing the knife deeper into my own wound. When I got home that night, the uniform weighed more than ever. I dropped it over the chair, but the smell of gunpowder still clung to my skin. I showered twice, scrubbed my arms until they burned, but when I closed my eyes, the scene replayed anyway. The shot, his collapse, her scream, a loop without end. A private punishment no tribunal could ever absolve. The consequences didn't stop at guilt. Hours later, my phone rang. A voice, rough and low. "We know who you are. You took one of ours." Then silence. Line dead. Another threat for the growing file in my life. Another invisible scar. I could have asked for protection, but I knew better. Wearing the badge paints a target on your back. You survive by never forgetting it's there. The city itself reacted. Some neighbors patted my back, thanking me for saving her. Others turned away, suspicion in their eyes, as if I had brought more harm than good. That's the paradox of this badge. To some, we're guardians. To others, monsters. And sometimes the line is so thin, even we can't see which side we're on. On the official report, I was cleared of wrongdoing. On the streets, absolution would never come. Because when I close my eyes, it isn't the shot I hear. It's the silence that followed. Heavy, endless. The kind of silence that fuses itself to your soul. 2 days later, when the weight of silence was becoming unbearable, I was called back to the precinct. They told me the widow wanted to speak to me. At first, I thought it was some mistake, a breach of protocol, but it wasn't. She had insisted. Against every recommendation, they allowed it. The meeting was set in a cold, windowless room, just a metal table between us. When she walked in, she didn't look like the same woman from the night of the shooting. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but also a piercing resolve that disarmed me more than any weapon could. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared, as if searching my soul for the truth no report would ever contain. I sat across from her, my hands flat on the table, but I couldn't hold her gaze for long. She was the one who broke the silence first. "Do you know why I asked to see you?" I swallowed hard, saying nothing. Then she continued, "Because I needed to look into your eyes again, and know if you pulled that trigger out of duty or out of choice." The words landed like bricks on my chest. I drew in a breath, but the truth clogged my throat. I could have hidden behind the lines I'd rehearsed 100 times. Imminent threat, defense of life, necessary shot. But something inside me refused. "I pulled the trigger because I saw no other way," I admitted, my voice low, ragged. "But also because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you in there. And maybe that made the difference." Her eyes tightened, each word cutting deeper, but she didn't look away. "Do you think that comforts me?" she asked. "Do you think saving my life erases what you did? You killed the man I chose to love despite his mistakes." There was no defense, no answer that would matter. I stayed silent, crushed under the weight of her truth. And then she said something I never expected. "I know who he was, Detective. I know the crimes, the guns, the life he chose. But he was mine. Do you understand that? Mine. The law will never acknowledge it, but the heart doesn't follow codes or statutes." The sentence split me in half. She wasn't denying his crimes, wasn't rewriting him as a saint. She was declaring the one truth the system erases. Even the worst man can be someone's everything. And by firing that shot, I hadn't just ended a threat. I had stolen her world. I forced myself to speak. "I carry every face with me. He'll haunt me too." She leaned back, breathing deeply. The hate I'd seen in her eyes hadn't vanished, but something else was there now. A bitter kind of acceptance. "Then carry it," she said, "because I can't carry it alone." The silence that followed was heavy, but necessary. For the first time, I realized there were no sides in this story. I wasn't just the cop, and she wasn't just the criminal's widow. We were two broken souls, chained together by the same bullet, condemned to share the weight of it forever. When she stood to leave, her final words carved themselves into me like scars. "The difference between us, Detective, is that you still get to choose who you'll be after this. I don't." And that was the moment I understood. That conversation didn't just change how I saw the shooting. It changed how I saw myself. That night, when I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I let the darkness fill the rooms, like it was part of the punishment. I sat at the edge of the bed, still wearing the holster heavy at my side, staring into nothing, listening to the distant hum of a city that never sleeps. Every horn, every siren felt like a cruel reminder. There will always be more violence, more choices, more lives resting on the hands of those who carry a gun. But something inside me had shifted forever. Her words echoed without mercy. You still get to choose who you'll be after this. It was like she had placed a mirror in front of me, forcing me to face not just the cop, but the man I had become. I realized that for years I had hidden behind the badge, treating it like a shield against guilt. But it wasn't. The badge only amplified who I already was. If I didn't face my flaws head-on, each new call would only carve me deeper into someone I didn't want to be. I pulled the silver dollar from my pocket, the one my brother gave me the day I joined the force. For so long, I believed it was a charm of protection. But staring at it now, I understood it was something else. A reminder that every decision comes with a price. My brother made his choices, and paid with his life. I made the right choice, at least legally, and I was still paying with my soul. There was no such thing as a clean escape. The only difference was whether you could carry the cost. In the days that followed, I began to see the city differently. The patrol cars, the calls on the radio, the wary stares from strangers, they weren't just background noise anymore. I saw stories, intersecting lives, some colliding fatally, each one leaving behind marks that would never wash away. I realized that being a cop wasn't only about catching or shooting, but about carrying fragments of other people's stories forever. The transformation didn't come all at once. It was slow, painful. Each time I reviewed my statement, I wondered if it would have been easier to lie, to hide my hesitation, to leave out the anger I felt in that hallway. But then I remembered her voice, her eyes, her truth. And I understood. Honesty isn't about absolution. It's about not losing yourself. The law could clear me. The department could move on. But if I betrayed myself, there'd be nothing left to protect. I started writing in a notebook, something I had never done before. I wrote down faces, words, moments. On the first page, I wrote hers. Carry it, because I can't carry it alone. Maybe it was my way of sharing the burden. Or maybe it was a silent plea not to let it dissolve into sterile paperwork. I found that putting it on paper gave the chaos shape. It didn't disappear, but it stopped, being a faceless ghost. And then I understood something I never had before. There is no police work without humanity. The day I stop questioning, stop hurting, stop wrestling with myself, that's the day I'll be more dangerous than the men I chase. Because a cop without inner conflict is a cop already lost. And as heavy as my guilt was, at least I wasn't lost. Not yet. The transformation was in accepting the scar and moving forward, not as a hero, not as a martyr, but as a man who knows that every decision costs something, and even when the price is steep, he still chooses to wake up, put on the badge, and face the city again. Because maybe it's not about erasing the pain. Maybe it's about learning to live with it, without letting it decide who I become. The case was officially closed days later, when I signed the final report and delivered my last statement. Internal affairs reached the obvious conclusion. The shooting was justified, an imminent threat neutralized, a hostage saved. It was filed away with the cold efficiency of bureaucracy, another human tragedy reduced to paragraphs on paper. For them, it was over. For me, it never would be. I remember the day I drove back to that street, not in uniform, just as a man revisiting the scene. The blood was gone, scrubbed away. The porch looked the same, but the air still carried something heavy, like a scar you couldn't see but couldn't deny. Neighbors glanced at me as I passed, some with quiet gratitude, others with veiled resentment. Every look was a verdict. Every step was a reminder that the streets never forget. They buried him in a small cemetery on the edge of town. I heard from colleagues that she went every day that first week, sitting beside the headstone as if she were still speaking to him, as if he could still answer. I couldn't bring myself to go, not even from a distance. Not because I feared her reaction, but because I knew that place didn't belong to me. That was her space for grief. My grief lived elsewhere, silent, private, locked inside me. Back at the precinct, life moved on. New cases, new calls, new blood. The city never stops asking for more. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't hear the dispatcher's metallic voice anymore without feeling a weight in my chest. Each call carried the same unspoken question: are you ready to carry another scar? A week later, the captain summoned me. Good work, Blake. You acted as expected. I want you back on the streets next. Weak. He spoke like I had just checked off another box on a list. I nodded, but inside I knew that stepping back onto those streets would never be the same. Now every alley, every shadow, every face reminded me that behind every call are loves, losses, and truths that never make it into reports. That night I sat on my balcony, the silver dollar spinning in my hand. The city stretched out below me, its lights blinking like artificial stars. I thought of how many men and women out there at that very moment were about to make desperate choices, and how many cops, just like me, were ready to pull a trigger, believing they were doing the right thing. The line between saving and destroying had never felt thinner. The radio sat on the table beside me. All it would take was turning the dial, and I'd be back in the rhythm again. But that night, I left it off. I needed silence. I needed to close what no report could ever really conclude, because the real conclusion wasn't in the paperwork. It was in deciding whether or not I'd keep carrying the badge, and I chose to keep carrying it, not because I thought of myself as a hero, not because I believed I was absolved, but because I understood that my role wasn't to save myself. It was to keep trying, even if it broke me to save others, even if it meant leaving pieces of myself behind every time. The next morning, I put the uniform back on. It weighed heavier now, and I knew it always would. It wasn't meant to feel lighter. It was meant to remind me that every call, every hallway, every survivor's eyes would carve into me forever. And maybe that was its own form of justice. Not the justice written in laws or handed down in courtrooms, but the kind carried in silence by those who choose to keep showing up. The occurrence was officially closed. But inside me, it was only beginning. Time has passed, but the night of that gunshot never left me. Some memories fade, some dissolve into routine, but others carve themselves so deep they live under your skin, like invisible tattoos, reminding you that choices don't vanish just because the clock keeps moving. That house, that hallway, that woman kneeling beside the man bleeding out, those things became part of me, and they always will. I've learned that justice isn't clean. It isn't black or white. It's a gray zone where the law tries to balance on human shoulders. And we, the ones wearing the badge, are forced to make decisions inside that fog, knowing that every choice leaves a scar, even when we act by the book. The law can absolve me, but conscience never does. Conscience reminds me that the man I shot wasn't just a suspect. He was someone's world, and the woman I saved may have wished she hadn't been saved at all. That's the hardest lesson. Saving a life doesn't always make you a hero. Sometimes saving one life means destroying another. And living inside that paradox, that's what this job truly is. Every time I put on the uniform, I'm not just protecting the city, I'm accepting the weight of decisions that no report can make clean. When I think of my brother, I see it even clearer. He made the wrong choices and paid with his life, but I still loved him. And if it had been him on that floor, if another cop had pulled the trigger, I'd hate that officer with the same fire she hates me. That's when I understood. Every bullet fired tears through two lives, the one who falls and the one who fires. Today, I don't chase. Redemption. Redemption is for saints, and I am no saint. My role is simpler and heavier: to keep going, to live with scars, to keep showing up, to remember that behind every suspect or victim are human beings with stories the world will never read in a report. The badge doesn't absolve me. The badge reminds me not to forget. So here's the truth I carry now. Never judge a cop only by the report or a criminal only by the crime. Between the lines are whole lives. Behind every bullet, there are stories no one will ever hear. And all of us, whether in uniform or not, carry ghosts that the world will never see. I move forward, not because I believe I was right, but because I've learned that right and wrong blur together more often than anyone wants to admit. And when they do, the only choice left is to make sure the pain doesn't turn you into the very thing you swore to fight against. If you've stayed with me until now, this story is yours too. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell me, which part of this story spoke to you the most? Your voice matters, because in the end, we're all witnesses to this gray zone we call life.